Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Welcome back to another video. We're going to do a little different topic today. Might not be hearing about this topic on the television or on social media. So I got a lot of material today. We're going to go through it kind of quickly, so please do the reading on your own. We're going to start out with CNN. Internet shutdowns used to be rare, increasingly becoming the norm in much of the world. Everybody likes the internet, right? It's our main source of communication as a people. We're at the verge. Myanmar's government shuts down internet indefinitely in response to protests. It's going to be a common theme we see today. The conduct of governments, BBC, Myanmar coup, internet shutdowns. Check out the articles. We're moving along. Trust.org, slowdowns and shutdowns, Africans challenge internet restrictions. Usually, you hear about North Korea, China, but it's actually far more common than we're led to believe. We're in Courts, Africa, publications, Sudan shuts down the internet after a military coup. Starting to see a pattern here. We're at VOA News. Africa, Burkina Faso, internet shutdown continues into fourth day. Protests as usual. Let's see. I got a Bloomberg article here. Senegal shuts down TV stations. Internet disrupted. Yeah, we can't even view this news because of these paywalls. That's another way that they are able to shut down the internet and perform censorship. At least in the West, they use these paywalls so that we can't access information. The Washington Post, why are so many African leaders shutting off the internet in 2019? Why indeed? Anyone want to take a guess what happened in 2019? We're at the verge again. Internet shutdowns by governments proliferated to a truly alarming pace. Favorite tactic for stifling dissent in the 21st century. We're moving along. Al Jazeera mapping internet shutdowns around the world. This is a really cool one. Yeah, and we see a large concentration in pivotal sectors of the global economy. Africa, India, China. Moving along. Zimbabwe orders second internet shutdown. A week of deadly protests. Swaziland government shuts down internet. Check out the articles. The Jakarta Post, pro-democracy protests mount as Eswatini blocks internet. Africa's last absolute monarchy shuts down the internet. BenjaminData.com, the protracted history of internet shutdowns in Africa. This one's very detailed. Really good one. Very interesting. Internet shutdowns curtail information, draw criticism. 2021. France24.com with internet shutdown. Iran seeks to limit protest outcry. So clearly they're using this to stifle protests and jam their agenda down the throats of regular people. France 24, Pakistan blocks social media access after violent anti-France protests. Anti-France protests in Pakistan. This is getting back into the neo-colonialism that we often talk about in these presentations. On the TV, they will talk about global economics in general, and that's a euphemism for neo-colonialist conduct on behalf of the more powerful G7 nations. and we see that is in fact the case. Pakistan protesting France and their subjugation by France, just like in many places of Africa. Okay. Burkina Faso shut down internet amid growing violence. We went over that one already. Wall Street Journal. Internet shutdowns become a favorite tool of governments. It's like we suddenly went blind. Governments increasingly order telecoms to turn off web access in neighborhoods, regions, or whole countries, sometimes for months. So the government is leaning on these telecom private companies to do all this stuff, right? Access Now, 5 years later, the internet shutdown that rocked Egypt. Egypt did it too. They were having a lot of protests. New York Times, Egypt cuts off internet and cell services. Of course, we have a paywall, so we can't learn about what's happening around the world. Another form of censorship, Kentic.com, from Egypt to Uganda, a decade of internet shutdowns. You don't really hear about this on the TV, right? You never hear Bernie Sanders talk about it. You never hear Trump talk about it. You never hear QAnon talk about it, Nancy Pelosi, AOC. Rashida, I think her name is. The other gentlewoman, I forget her name. But yeah, you never hear any of these people talking about this very important topic, right, that affects all of us. This is how we communicate and learn. And fascist governments from around the world are shutting them off like it's the easiest thing ever. The Great Firewall of China. Everyone knows about the China internet ban. Guardian.com. Stay with me, guys. Here we're at the Diplomat, how China helps the Cuban regime stay afloat and shut down protests. So this is an example of how communism operates. We've been seeing how so-called democracy operates, right, in Africa and French-controlled regions like Pakistan. And we see that there's no difference between the two. Capitalism, quote-unquote, or so-called the West, or so-called democracy, is exactly the same as the communism in Cuba and China and in other communist regimes throughout history. We're at Wired.com, the draconian rise of internet shutdowns. Newsweek, China behind Cuba's protests being censored, how Beijing could be linked. That's pretty wild stuff here. Kudos if you've heard of any of it. CNN Business, Facebook bans news in Australia as fights with the government escalate over the extreme lockdowns and mandates that have recently come about with the injections. So we see the exact same techniques in the so-called Western democracies. The only difference here is that China, normally it's the government in the other parts of the world who are performing the shutdowns, but in the West, they use a different tactic here. Because the West has constitutions that protect personal freedoms and liberties, most famously in the United States. And so therefore the government cannot directly intervene and say shut down the internet like they have been in Africa and in Pakistan and these other places. So they use this convenient loophole with private companies, right? Because you hear on the news, on the TV, it's like, oh, these guys, they don't want to make a cake for this gay couple. They're bigots. We got to ban them. We got to take them out. Or, oh, we have this controversial opinion on the internet. We got to censor these guys. And so it's the private companies doing all of this stuff because they're not bound to a constitution. They're not an elected government. So it's a really favorite tactic that we see in the West where they use these companies. They simply lean on these companies and then the companies just comply as if they're part of the government, right? It seems as if they're separate and distinct, but that's not the case in reality when we examine their actions here. So let's move along here. Facebook removes Trump campaign's misleading coronavirus video. Another paywall. Okay. So yeah, just any type of kind of, they use Trump and they use the conservative caricature to set the precedent for removing content, essentially what they call historically book burning. And so half of the population, everyone who does not like Trump or Trump supporters, they become more accepting of the idea of removing content based on the guise of, oh, it's extremist content, it's Nazis, white nationalists, this type of thing. And they do the same thing to the conservatives, talking about Antifa and the so-called minorities protesting. And so you see the same exact technique being played upon both parties inside the false dichotomy. We're at the verge. Facebook declares emergency situation and removes Trump video. Facebook was also... Okay, here we go. Fastcompany.com. Facebook deletes alternative health pages as the war on fake news escalates. I forgot to throw this in here, but this is an important one to wrap this all up today. They use politics and these controversial taboo topics to facilitate the censorship from the state, right? And so Facebook, again, we see a private company deleting alternative health pages as the war on fake news escalates. So inside the fake news war, there are heavy casualties, so-called alternative health pages, which are they are well within their rights to discuss their own views, right? I mean, the company Facebook, what a coincidence, it's part of the 1%. It's destroying alternative health knowledge pages or discussions on their website. And who else is part of the 1%? Well, Big Pharma, Big Ag, all of these same players that we like to talk about around here. They're all working together in that sense, where they will package it in a way that these are Trump supporter, anti-vaxxers. They use a lot of this advanced psychological terminology so that we kind of disregard or dismiss their voice. And what ends up happening is they get trapped into these political ideologies. And so most people, especially well-meaning people, they would read this and think to themselves, well, these are anti-vaxxers, they're not factual, but in fact they are factual, just like all of these other opinions that we see being censored on the internet. They might not be exactly accurate, but that doesn't mean that they should not be heard, or at least allowed to be heard.